Every leader has stories about the challenges they faced and the struggles they have overcome. In the moment, those situations required strength, patience, perseverance, and courage. With time, those struggles provide us lessons for how to be better leaders. Today's guest has learned to see those struggles as gifts. As a co-founder and CEO, he never imagined the challenges of building a $500 million organization that serves tens of thousands of people. Throughout his life, he experienced the divergence between the intentional leader he wanted to be and the less engaged version of him that showed up at the office and at home every day. One day at a company meeting, he decided to share one of his first struggles as a young adult. That story, a pivotal experience that had transformed his life, inspired his employees with radical transparency, humility, and the idealism of his dreams for the company. In today's book, he shares 12 of those stories from his leadership journey. Now, just to temper you, we won't have time to cover all 12. They're beautifully told in an absolutely beautiful book. Each chapter shares the details of the story, the broader lesson any leader can apply, and that word application is really important for how the story later unfolded in his life. We welcome the author of The Gift of Struggle, Life-Changing Lessons About Leading, Bobby Herrera. Welcome to the show.
How the underdog, brother. Appreciate you having me. Appreciate the kind of words.
Beautiful to have you, man. And we have to share the serendipity of this. I've just signed with a new agent in the US, Gray Miller, Scott Miller. Big shout out to you and Drew Young, who work with both Bobby and me. And when I was telling them about the concept of my new book, they went, does any book resonate that you have there behind you on your library? And it wasn't on my library. It was here that I lean on. So when I'm on camera here, I lean on a pile of books. And I went, yeah, this book. And I held it up and they're like, what? Bobby? We work with Bobby. So I was like, talk about serendipity. And we have to say a shout out to those guys, man.
Small world, isn't it?
Absolutely, man. And serendipity is throughout this book as well. It's glued together with serendipity. But I hope I've raised people's curiosity about the book. There's little stories in it that will resonate with you. And the first is the bus story. And I thought I'd tee you up in a different way here to tell this story because kind words combined with kind gestures can change lives. And I found this beautiful quote by Mother Teresa. And she said, kind words can be short and easy to speak, but their echoes are truly endless. And that was the case for you, Bobby. Let's hand it over to you to tell the bus story.
I'm often asked about the bus story. It's my marker story. At the essence of it, I just profoundly believe that kindness in the shadows creates heroes in the daylight. And that's what happened for me. When I was 17, my brother and I, we were on a return trip home from a basketball game. And I remember the energy on the bus. We were excited. We had just experienced a big win. And on the way home, we stopped for dinner. And everybody unloaded off the bus, except for my brother Ed and I. At that point in my family story, we didn't have the means to play sports and afford dinner. It was something he and I were very accustomed to. Staying back on that bus, my mom would prepare her legendary burritos, which I would kill for right now, by the way. And we stayed back on the bus while everybody else unloaded. We were about to get started and having our dinner when this gentleman steps on board the bus. And as he's walking towards the back, he teased me a little bit because my brother had outscored me that night. And then he said something to me that I'll never forget. And he says, Bobby, it would make me very happy if you would allow me to buy you boys dinner so you can join the rest of the team. Nobody else has to know. All you have to do to thank me is do the same thing for another great kid in the future, just like you. And it's still hard for me to explain the gratitude that I felt at that moment. Like I felt this, I had this feeling inside of me that's still hard for me to describe. And I remember stepping off the bus that evening and I'm 17. I can't see 3 feet in front of my face. All I knew is that a year from then, I wanted to raise my hand and join the military, which I did. But outside of that, I had no idea. But after that moment on the bus, even though I had no idea what I was going to do, I knew why. That moment inspired me to figure out how to pay forward that kind act to other kids like me who were born on the wrong side of the opportunity divide. It gave me something to believe in. It gave me hope. And it came at a time when I needed it more than I imagined at that point in my life. I had more reverse role models than I care to admit. And I remember at that moment feeling something that I think every single one of us desperately want. Like, I felt at that moment that someday I could do what I call check the ultimate box. Will my story matter? And I felt that if I paid forward that kind act, like he had called me to action that night, I would get the opportunity to check that box. And it changed everything for me.
And not only changed everything for you in the moment, but actually it changed everything for you when you told the story, which I found really interesting. But before we come to that, because the book is very much a story of becoming a better leader, it's a story of empathy as well. I felt a lot of empathy and not seeing things through the lens. And you saw things through your lens. And you were born in 13 kids in the family. Your dad,
number 11.
13 kids, though, you say in the book, right?
Yeah, number 11 of 13.
Number 11 of 13, right? And your dad, migrant worker, came in during the shortage population after the war, worked really hard. You grew up, that was your paradigm. So I'm saying this for a reason that's the way you saw the world. So when you're sitting on the back of the bus, it didn't appear to me that you felt poor me. You didn't have any of that. You were just like, this was my world. And the reason I say that was I thought about, say, the kids that take it for granted that going into, after the game, go into the restaurant. And many of us now, our children live in pretty much luxury, in privilege, certainly in privilege. And it made me think of previous shows that we've had, previous episodes of the Innovation Show. One of those was with a black lady called Terry Givens, and she wrote a book called Radical Empathy. And I wanted to share this story with you. So we're talking away like this, right? And me sharing like a moment of vulnerability. She goes, "Oh, I had to have that conversation with my kids." And I have two boys as well. And I was like going, "Oh yeah, it must have been the birds and the bees conversation, right?" And I was like cocksure myself. Yeah, that conversation, yeah. And she goes, I don't think we're talking about the same thing here. She goes, the conversation every black mother has to have with her black children, which is, don't be playing with toy guns in the front garden because you're going to get killed. And I was like dumbfounded. And I share that as an extreme story of thinking you're knowing what's going on with the other person and having a story in your head from your paradigm and being totally wrong. Because this is one of the things your book does, is open up that possibility to go, what you intend is not the impact that you're having. And it can be based on just a different paradigm that you live in.
That's a powerful experience. And you're right. At that point in my family story, like, struggle had been the only consistent theme. So it was a way of life. And a big question that I asked to myself often was, will my future be any different? Well, that moment gave me something to believe in. It gave me purpose. It gave me it became the invisible force that drove me from that day forward. And it did take me some time from that moment that I stepped off the bus to the moment that I developed the courage to tell it. It took me 15 years. It was raging like an inferno inside of me. But one of the interesting backstories about that moment was, the gentleman that stepped on board the bus. He was a very successful businessman in the community. And the narrative that I told was that, hey, people like him, they don't see poor, struggling brown kids like me. And with one kind act, not only did he teach me that I was wrong, but he taught me that one of the single most important parts of leadership is seeing and encouraging potential. That was the very first time in my life that I felt seen. And that was a transformative part of that story. is I felt truly seen, and he did it in a way that just I feel is one of the best examples of wisdom and humility. He showed me in that moment that he wanted more for me than from me. And that is at the heart of leadership. When you make someone feel seen and you make someone feel like you want more for them than from them.
Beautiful. And that is in the book as well, as about being a leader in your company. And we'll come back to that. But that moment, that word in your ear, I've had that from people that made me believe in myself over the years from a sports perspective. And I hope that I'm doing the right thing by my kids, spotting those moments where you can put in a wise word. In fact, my kids kind of get a bit sick of me sometimes, Bobby. I don't know about you, but my wife recently said, "Oh my God, Aidan, living with you is like living in a real life TED talk sometimes." And I was like, "Oh, okay, I gotta maybe dial it down a bit." But sometimes I'd be in the car, doing soccer pop, bringing them here and there and everywhere, and
Right.
I'd hear maybe their friend uh, talking negatively about themselves, going, "Oh, I'm
Yeah.
terrible at that," and I'll step in for that exact reason, and I go, "Don't say that about yourself. Be proud of
Mhm.
yourself. Did you do your best? Then that's okay, as long as you learn from it." So I'll say that, and they're probably doing the same thing. And oh, I hate getting a lift with Mr. McCullen, but it
There's no
can
doubt.
make a difference. That's the point.
Oh, 15 years from now, they'll repeat it to someone else.
And
Yeah,
not
it'll
know,
stick.
yeah, and not know the origin,
It'll
which is beautiful as well. But let's close that story, because you did go back to that man and tell him. And actually, I did something similar, Bobby. It was the best thing I ever did. When I think when you write a book, you realize these moments of people who helped you along the way. And I made this deal with myself that I'd bring them all for breakfast and just thank them all separately. And so many of them were like, did I actually? Oh, wow, I didn't know I made any impact. But this
Yeah.
man was so touched by your message to him.
Yeah, that's part of the beauty of that moment is he had no idea the impact it made on me. And 15 years after that moment, I finally developed the courage to tell the story to my company. And I often say that the moment I shared that story was the beginning of the transformation of my company becoming a community. And there's a world of difference in the two, not only in how you lead, but in how the culture comes to life between the two. And it was about, I would say about 6 years after I told that story to my community, that one summer afternoon, I picked up the phone and I called him. I got his number from his son, who I'd played sports with. And I told his son the story. His son had no idea. I called his dad. His name's Harry. And I told him the story. I told him the impact it had had on me. I told him how blessed I had been to respond to the call to action from that evening and some of the fortunate things I've been able to do to pay it forward. And I could sense in that conversation he was deeply touched. And a few days later, I received a note from him. And in that note, it read, "Bobby, thank you for calling me and telling me the bus story. I don't mind sharing the many tears that I shed during and after that call. You made me feel like my life had mattered." Isn't that something? Here, this man gives me purpose, gives me something to believe in, and he's telling me that I made him feel like his life had mattered. That was a real special moment for me in the way that life gives you fulfillment full circle when you respond to what I believe we're called for.
One of the drivers of my work is to bring stories like yours to really inspire people to go, don't hold back. Like, if you want to ask that girl or guy to dance, do it. If you want to thank somebody, do it. That, like, don't regret not
Right.
doing it, because you don't know, something that you think is small can be huge for the other person. And
Well,
this is one of the things that I saw throughout the book, is that thread. And it even came, as you say, with you. So during the last days of your dad's life, may he rest in peace,
mm, mhm.
you tell us that he became the day he became a Bracero, and I'll let you explain what that was the day he said he won the lottery. And you thought that perhaps he had bitterness about the struggles that he had in his life, but it was
Yeah.
the total opposite. And this is this idea of thinking that the story and then hearing it from the other
Right.
persons.
Yeah. We often form a narrative, and it's reality. Welcome to humanity is what I often say. It's often not a real positive narrative. Well, the same was true with my dad in the final days of his life. I knew a lot of his stories because my dad was a magnificent storyteller. I called him the Mexican John Wayne around the old Western actor in the U.S. But he just, he had this way of telling stories, and I always had to listen to him. And so I inherited that gift from him. But in his final days in the hospital, when he had the energy, I would ask him to tell me one of his stories. And this one particular day, he told me the story about the day that he was selected to become a Bracero. And in Mexico, the Bracero program was an agreement between the U.S. and Mexico where Mexican men would come to the U.S. to offset the labor shortage during the Great Depression era is when it started. And it continued throughout like the mid-60s. Well, my dad did that for 10 years. And I knew a lot of the stories about the journey and the hardships and some of the things that he experienced. But the story he told me that day was the day that he had become an actual bracero, that he was selected. So every year that men were selected, there was only a limited amount of bracero like cards that were handed out. In 1954, when my dad was selected, there were 300,000 men amongst millions that stood in line across Mexico that were selected. But what he told me that day was that year that he was selected was the 9th year that he had stood in line. So for 8 years, he had stood in these lines amongst millions of other men in Mexico, only to face rejection. And to make that even more significant, he was standing in these lines so that he could try to create a better story for his family. They were living amidst poverty that I can't even imagine. And he came back every year to try to become a bracero, and I didn't know that. And so at that moment, it completely shifted the narrative that I had in my mind, because he told me in Spanish that the day that I was selected was the day that I won la loteria, the lottery. And the narrative that I told was that he's got to have some bitterness, some anger, some resentment, because I was keenly aware of a lot of the hardships that he experienced. But that moment just changed everything for me, because I realized at that moment that I am the descendant of a resilient pioneer. This man never, ever gave up. And I am here because of the hardships and the sacrifice that he endured for so many years. And that moment just changed how I felt about always being the stream, right? The stream always wins. That's where my saying of always be the stream always wins. My dad was the stream, and he kept flowing, he kept going. And because of that, I was able to have the story that I have today.
Like you were saying about bringing the kids hiking during the pandemic. I used to bring my kids. I probably shouldn't say this. I used to bring them to their where they used to go to Cub Scouts, but it was closed, and we used to find our way in. Let's say, put it that way.
You're being creative.
Yeah, and one day I brought them up there, and this is when they were younger, and I'd make them hot chocolate. And we'd sit up there and we'd have a picnic with the hot chocolate and sit on a rock. And there was a little stream, a tiny little stream. And I used to tell them about the stream. This is where I probably get annoying sometimes with them. But they were young enough to have to listen to me back then. Now they have headphones and stuff like that. But I was telling them about the stream. As I look at the stream it's not a straight line. It will hit a rock and it'll find a way around it. It'll create its own path, but it keeps finding a way. And I use it as this story of the rocks as well the whole time.
Right.
I'm planting that seed now, because I'm going to come back to this idea of the children later on, because there's a story in that you tell us about your son that is really important as well. But let's stick on the
Yes.
story of story, because in the book you emphasize the importance of story and how it helps the people at your company understand the Populus Group, how they understood your intense passion only through you telling that story. So your
Yeah.
story, the bus story, and telling it not only to them but then to other executives was a huge breakthrough in so many ways in your business life.
Well, the magic story can't be denied. I believe that a good story should give the listener something that they can take to make their story better. And I believe that stems from the fact that we share three basic desires, right? We want to stand out, we want to fit in, and we want to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. Well, that story that I had, my marker moment, the bus story, I kept it locked in a vault deep in my heart. And absent of me sharing that story, they did the same thing all of us do. They made up their own, right? So in their mind, I was just this intense, passionate entrepreneur that I believe they felt I wanted to create something special. But because I wasn't filling in the blank for them, they were making up their own narrative. Right? So when I finally developed what I believe is a core competency of leadership, vulnerability, and told that story, I filled in that blank for them. And at that moment, they knew what type of community I wanted to build, and more importantly, why. And you and I both know that what you do is important, but it pales in comparison to why. And since I hadn't told them that story, that part was missing. And when I completed that sentence or that thought for them, they were then able to make what I believe is a very important choice for anyone that's on the journey with us. I then, in a sense, gave them the pen and extended trust for them to help me narrate the story. Right? Up to that point, we were narrating different stories. Right? And in leadership and entrepreneurship, people always talk about what's your strategy or whatever. Like, you know what? I don't make it that complicated, that sexy. I always go back and I'm like, hey, tell me the story you're narrating and why. And I was able to do that for my community after I told that story. And we've been building on the magic ever since. And the more that I tell it, the more that I share it, the more clarity it creates, and the more consistency we create, the more character we create. And those are all trust building pillars of any community that you're trying to build as a leader.
That idea of handing them the pen and getting them to co-create the story or co-create the strategy is a really
Yeah.
important thing that you talk about. So you talk about building your company, the Populus Group, and how in the early days you were trying to do it all yourself. And it was only through, in sport, we talk about player-led teams. So
Right.
the players know what to do in the situations on the pitch, because I always talk about NFL. In American football, the coach is very close to the pitch and very close to, because there's so many breaks in play. But in so many other sports, soccer, in football, in rugby, you don't get those opportunities to just get the messages on. So the players need to know what to do in the moment.
Right.
And you talk about this from a leadership perspective, and it was a difficult thing for you to do. And it wasn't out of trying to micromanage. It was actually more intention versus impact in the gap between them.
That's right. I wanted to. I desperately wanted to, but I just didn't know how. And I'm just grateful that that moment occurred and I was able to fill in the blank for them. And it started opening my eyes in a way that, and I developed clarity in a way that I didn't have before as to the importance of making sure that I share my purpose, making sure that they knew how it gives me meaning, and really helping them decide whether or not they wanted to help me, right? Because they have a choice. They can either choose to narrate the story or they can take their talent somewhere else. And I wasn't doing that for them. Prior to that, there was a gap. I think they could genuinely feel that I wanted to, but I just didn't know how. And I would think back about that moment, and I'm just so grateful that I finally listened to my intuition and stopped listening to that narrative that I had in my mind. The narrative that I told, it's like, oh, it's not going to make a difference. It's not going to matter. They're not going to care. And I just played that over and over and over. And often when I'll tell that story to an audience or whatever, at that point in time when I told the story, we had some pretty fortunate return on luck as a company. It was about 10, 11 years in. We had just surpassed the 100 million in revenue mark. So I still very blessed. We were still doing some good things, but there was something missing for me from a fulfillment perspective. Well, I tell that story, and we just turned 23. And from the time that I told that story to now, which has been a little over 10 years, we've grown an additional 500 million, right? So 100 million pre-story, 500 million post-story. So I'll often share that example with leaders. I'm like, you tell me, does story matter?
Brilliant. So let's link it. So congratulations on your 23rd birthday for Populus Group. But
Thank you.
let's go back to when you were 11 and the 11th year, and you talk about choosing the hardest right. And this is linked back to Jorge again, your dad, and
Yeah.
his direction in you, or his influence in you about
Mhm.
importance of keeping your word. And this
Yeah.
was a huge dilemma. So this is your dad on what was his deathbed, and
Right.
your promise to a friend to go to his wedding, and what unfolded.
Yeah. My dad, for most of his life, like he never made more than $150 a week. And so most of his life, his word was the only thing of value. And it was the most valuable thing that he owned. And he reminded us of that often. Well, when he was on his deathbed, it was around the time I was going to go visit. I was going to go visit him anyway, because I knew that maybe my final opportunity. Well, it happened to coincide with also a wedding of a friend that I was going to attend. And when I got the call that my dad had been taken to the hospital, I was going to change all my plans and redivert everything. Well, I called my dad before I did that, and I decided to tell him, like, "Hey, Dad, I'm going to be home sooner than I thought." I got the call on a Wednesday. I was going to see him that Sunday. I said, "I'll be home tomorrow. Hang on." And he was my hero. I just wanted to make sure that I saw him. And I remember when I told him that, I felt this pregnant pause, and I knew what that pregnant pause meant. He had this very distinguished pregnant pause that signaled to me, "You're about to do something I don't agree with, son." And I'm sitting there pleading, telling him that, "Hey, I'm going to go home." And he's like, "Hey, son, don't you have a wedding to go to?" And I was like, "Yes, I do." And he said, "Well, I'll be okay. Come see me after the wedding." So I start pleading again. And he's like, "Son, did you give him your word?" I said, "I did." He goes, "Okay." He said, "Well, then you have to go." He said, "You're welcome to try and come down here, but if you choose to come see me, I'm not going to let you in the hospital room." And he was stubborn enough that I know he wouldn't have done it. Right. So I kept my word, went, and fortunately he was still okay when I got there on Sunday. But my dad was the kind of man that, regardless of the circumstance, regardless of what was at risk, you always choose the hardest right over the easiest wrong. And to me, the carry forward lesson from that was just the importance of trust building signals in everything that you do. Like we agreed to start this call today at 8:01, because I've done that ever since, I was beginning days of my company. I start calls at off time so that when I get there on time, exactly when I say I'm going to be there, it sends a signal of trust. And my dad was just very intuitive about doing things like that, Aidan.
Not only did your dad give the advice, but you actioned it. This is such an important thing that I wanted to touch on. When you had feedback throughout your career, so pre-Populus Group, working in a company, got some feedback where you thought you were ideal for promotion, you were passed over, you seek out a mentor. And what I'm pretty sure many people would miss in that story was, it wasn't just that you sought out the mentor, but you say, and it's a throwaway comment, I did what she told me to do. And
Right.
that as a coach, so I coach
Mhm.
as a consultant, I often give advice to people, and there's a term called "don't cast pearls before swine." It's a biblical term, and what it literally
Mhm.
means is don't waste good pearls of wisdom with swine, because they'll just disregard them. And unfortunately, you see that with a lot of people, where and the less colorful term that I refer to those people as assholes. And an asshole is somebody who asks for advice and then doesn't do anything with it. And these people, everybody has them in their life somewhere. They're always moaning, always giving out. Have the opportunities, have the map of how to get out of the situation, but won't do anything about it, right? So each to their own. I'm not being judgmental there. But the successful ones are the people who take action, who apply the information. So I'm going to link together two concepts here. One is the
Right.
mentor and the actions you took. And then there's Dr. Joe and the work you did with Dr. Joe. This was the coach that you engaged. But the
Mhm.
application of the learnings that you had with Dr. Joe, this application word is so important.
Yeah, no doubt. Dr. Joe, I'm so grateful that he came into my life. He's my Sicilian father. Yeah. When I first met him, I was full of piss and vinegar in the beginning stages of my professional career. I was the kind of young professional that would go to the bookstore, buy 3 or 4 or 5 books, start one, quit a few chapters in, start another one, maybe finish one chapter, and the rest of them became expensive coasters. You use them to rest your elbows on. I was sitting drinks on mine. Like, they were that worthless for me. And when I met Dr. Joe, he assigned a book to me to read. And in the follow-ups, it became pretty evident that I was saying all the right things to him and not doing all the right things. And he asked me a cage-rattling question. He asked me, Bobby, give me examples from the book where you've specifically changed your behavior. All he heard was silence. I had nothing for him. But that moment just stood out and called me to action and really helped me understand what I call the difference between the 99% and the 1%. Anything you read, any advice that you take from someone, that's the 1%. But the application, that's where the magic happens. That's the 99%. And unfortunately, I believe our collective observation is there's too much of a premium placed on that 1%. Like, what are you reading? What are people who ask for advice? We need to put the premium on the behavioral change. And so from that day forward, imperfectly, but consistently, I started putting a premium on that 99%. And it came to life really prominently for me when you mentioned getting passed over. It actually, unfortunately, was worse than that. I got demoted and I had to go back and eat my own dog food. And I sought out a mentor because I had been told I wasn't a very good business person. And I was looking for ways to blame the person that demoted me. But when I finally got over my anger, I sought out a mentor who I felt could teach me the things that I needed to learn. And as she started giving me assignments, I focused diligently on applying everything she told me. And what I found interesting was the more that I applied what she told me, the more willing she was to teach me. And I think that's where the beauty of coachability comes in, right? The more I did what she asked me to do, the more she wanted to help me. And that actually was a real humbling exercise for me because it really came to life for me that it's like, well, maybe I'm not as good of a business person as I thought I was. But then I started changing my behavior through this course of applying everything that she told me, and connecting those two experiences for me was transformative. And it helped me change some things going forward. Like, any book that I buy or that I read, and I'll read it twice. I'll go through the first time, front to back, and then I'll go through the second time and I'll read it again and I'll highlight things that resonate. and I'll write a note specifically next to it on exactly how I'm going to apply something to enhance my behavior, change my behavior, or whatever.
Brilliant.
So it's a journey. Right?
And man, it's why with the show that one of the biggest pieces of feedback I receive from the audience is to make the show shorter. But you can't do justice to these books in a shorter show. Sometimes books, like for example, I'm just finished a series with this guy Peter Campo, The Emergent Approach to Strategy. Very dense, loads of examples. Some books need a different approach and
Sure.
to actually apply them. But it's why I write an article in line with each episode, because for me, that's an application of what I've learned. And it sticks then. It sticks for a long time because it's really the learning of it. But you reminded me of a story that I haven't shared before. And this is what your book does. It makes you reflect on moments that were really change moments in your life. So when I retired from rugby, I got a job I was an unpaid intern, and I bought this suit. I went to the job because when I was retiring, I was preparing for the new world, and I bought really nice suits. And I was that whole thing, dress for the job you want, not the job you have, right? So first thing that happens is I go to this building. It was a big media company. Go to the building. I had a nice car. I pulled up at the car park, went to drive into the car park, and the guy goes, "Have you got a pass?" And I said, "No, but I work for this company." And he looked me up and down and he goes, "All right, go ahead." Right. So I went to him then, learned his name, said hello to him, went over to him and asked him for a pass. And he was kind of looking at me real suspiciously, but he gave me one. So I went on every day, parked in that car park, went about my business. About 3 months later, the CEO goes, "Hey, I saw you parking in the car park. You know, there's limited spaces in there." And I was like, I knew. And I was like, "Oh, no, I didn't know that." And he goes, "I have people working in this company 20 years looking for a car place. How the heck did you get one?" Right. So that was application of knowledge that got me there. But I wanted to say this thing, which was, the knowledge was every day for an entire year, man. I listened to the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey book, every day, over and over and over. And the application of that was really awkward. And I wanted to share this because it's not easy to apply it because it feels weird. It's like, as you say in the book, brushing your teeth with the opposite hand.
Right.
There's an awkwardness at the start, and stuff like even coming to a meeting with an agenda and handing out copies of an agenda or sending it to people in advance. There was people kind of looking at you going, "Who is this guy?" And because they just weren't used to that, or starting a meeting at 16:03 to send a signal. But it's a signal that you're different and you're going to do things different now.
Right.
And when you own that, it actually it sends you in a totally different direction. And I just wanted to share that because this idea of ownership of that difference, it is life-changing.
It's transformative, and you're right. I think the most beautiful part about it are the trust building signals that it sends to others, and you actually create a sense of safety for them to do the same. Like just sitting in that awkwardness, and like we're talking about our kids a lot. Like for me, I love letting them sit in that mess they make or in that struggle, because it teaches them how to get out of it. And, I'll often tell my oldest boy, "Son, you can't talk your way out of something that you behave your way into. So how are you going to behave your way out of this? You can tell me all the right things, but how are you going to behave your way out of this? Because I want him to understand the 99%. It's synonymous with behavior, and that's awkward. It's counterintuitive. That's where it's interconnected to choosing the hardest right over the easiest wrong. Right? The easiest wrong is, all right, let me just go over here where it's safe or it's comfortable for me, right? I don't have to go through that process of learning something new, of getting through the mess that I made. So sending someone that signal, I think, is is powerful for both of you.
And talking of signals, one of the stories I had to share, and it made me self-reflect again, was the T chart. So this is with your son Santiago, that you noticed his behavior had changed. This bright, energetic kid started to go inside himself, and you were like, what's going on here? And you realized actually it was, again, intention impact gap, and it was having a major impact on him.
Yeah, my dad had a saying when I was young. I was a very mischievous kid. I was number 11. And I thought my sole mission in life was to try to figure out some form of mischief that my parents hadn't seen before. You know how hard that is to do as child number 11?
Innovation, man, innovation.
No doubt. No doubt. Well, my son, Santino, my dad he always used to tell me in Spanish, hijo eres, papá serás, which means a son you are, a dad you'll be, you'll get yours. Right? Well, Santino's my payback. And when he was young, this mini version of me was a very impulsive kid. He was the type of kid that heard no a lot. Right. And so the essence of the T chart, which was by far the hardest chapter for me to write, because it exposed a part of my leadership as his father that had what I felt was a major gap, right? Most of the time as I was guiding him, as I was directing him through the course of guidance from a counselor that we had him see because of some learning challenges that he had, I learned through a simple exercise of the T chart. This counselor had us track how often in our commands we gave him guidance on what he could do versus what he couldn't do. So in other words, how often does he hear no? And I think it's counterintuitive, right? As a parent, you're like, okay, don't do this, don't run, right? So an example is, instead of telling him don't run, shifting that to say, hey, son, you need to walk through the hall, right? So I started tracking these go and stop commands. And it was a real heartbreaking exercise for me because they were all disproportionately stop commands. And shifting that over helped transform the way I lead people. I shifted that behavior over into my business, into the community that I was building, and it helped me understand just how encouraging I was being to my people. How at that point in time, I thought I was being encouraging, but I wasn't being as encouraging as I thought, right? And that's a sense of building someone's confidence, building someone's esteem. I learned that through the journey of my son. And to this day, it's still the hardest thing that I do as a father. Like, it is deeply hardwired in us to say no. It is deeply hardwired in us to tell someone how not to do something. And shifting that narrative to this day is something that I have to work on every day. I've been consistent, but imperfect. And my kids will be the first ones to tell you just how imperfect and consistent I've been.
The kids are the families are great test bed to try out your leadership. And if they know what you're trying to instill, they have no problem holding the mirror up to you to give you feedback.
It's 360 feedback, isn't it?
And most feedback from me comes from my wife. No varnish there at all. It's just straight out with it, no problem. And it's great to have that mirror, that honest feedback, which is something that you talk about, the fact that it's hardwired in us also to be defensive about feedback, because we want to protect our sense of ourselves, our ego, the narrative we have of ourselves as well. So you shared this story that came from your team.
Yeah, that transition over into the community that I was building, Aidan, it really helped me understand just how I could do a much better job of preparing my leaders in terms of not just what great looked like, but catching them doing things right along the way. And it exposed to me just how underprepared I was putting these leaders that I was expecting to do good work for me I was just throwing them out into the fray. And I was actually compromising something I said to myself I would never do again when I got demoted. When I got demoted, and we talked about that example a short bit ago, I felt that I'd been put out the fray for a year. And during that year that I got demoted, I talked to the gentleman that I was reporting to twice. And I swore to myself, I'll never do that to my leaders. Well, you fast forward 10 plus years later or whatever. Yeah. Just like parenting, you realize, oh my gosh, I'm living out this behavior that I saw modeled somewhere else. No, everyone's doing their best, but we're living out behavior that we've seen modeled. And I knew that at that point in time, I needed to start modeling different behavior if I was going to transform the leadership maturity of my organization for years to come. So all those moments came together, experiencing that go and stop command exercise with my son. It just exposed so many things that I felt I needed more growth in as a leader myself.
I don't know if you've watched the show The Boys. Have you heard about The Boys on Amazon Prime yet?
No.
No, so right, don't let your kids see it. Right, it's rated 18s for a reason. It's probably the most violent and sexual show I've ever seen, but it's a brilliant black mirror of society, right? And it's about
Mm.
essentially superheroes who are worshipped like gods, and the power goes to their heads, so they don't obey the rules anymore. And it's essentially a
Oh, man.
black mirror of American politics and society in America. But there's a scene, right? So there's a main kind of hero, almost like a Captain America, and his name is Homelander. And in an episode I saw recently, he is assembling what's left of his group, his team that used to be known as the Seven. He's either fired or killed most of them, and there's only a few left. And he's really frustrated because he says, I'm dealing with a bunch of sycophants here, right? So these people are yes men, yes women. And they are that way because he kills everyone who challenges him. Yet
Right.
he says this in the moment. And that scene came to mind, not saying that you're like a mass murderer, a superhero,
No, I
but that story came to mind when you said, beautifully said, I've been muzzling the team I most trust. I thought that was a
exactly.
huge moment of transparency, but so much
Right.
wisdom.
You're talking about that experience I had in the conference room. I was with my executive team, and I'd always told them, like, you're on the payroll to tell me when I'm wrong. You're on the payroll to tell me no. And I believe they would tell you that they knew my intentions were good around that. However, I was muzzling them because when I would, when they would take me up on that invitation to tell me no or to tell me I'm wrong, I had this, my Latino Mexican John Wayne temper that I inherited would show by way of this vein that would protrude on my forehead, and no doubt probably followed by some colorful language. And I would express exactly how I felt about what they were saying. Well, of course they weren't going to say anything. So having to change that over the course of many years has been a transformative experience because it's created a safety for them to actually do that. But up to that point, I thought I was doing a pretty decent job. But I needed when that experience happened in the conference room, we were having a healthy conflict conversation, and one of the executives that I felt would be the most honest with me was muzzled, and the CFO spoke up and said, "Hey, look, why don't you tell him he's wrong? Like, tell him exactly how you feel. He's open to feedback. Just tell him exactly how you feel." And I looked over at him, and I could just tell by the look on his face. I was like, "You're afraid to tell me, aren't you?" And he said, "No." All I heard was yes. I knew his face said it all to me. And at that moment, I realized, yeah, it was one of those reflective moments, Black Mirror reflective moments for me, because I had been demonstrating through my behavior a different form of modeling than my words were inviting them to do.
And it's so hard, man. You know, when I was reading about that, I was thinking that no matter how well you're doing, you get knocked off the horse all the time, and you just
All
get
the
back
time.
up. You realize it. One of the things I do I haven't been as good as doing it recently. Again, fall off the horse was
Mhm.
your intentions for your day, and then how did you do a scorecard at the end of the day? How did I do against that? Where did I fall from the horse, and where could I have done better, etc. And it's a great way, like you were saying, about actually applying all the knowledge to yourself and going,
Mhm.
where can I do better today? I've one last one for you, one last story to bring it to
Sorry.
full circle to innovation. And it was so serendipitous. Again, I was writing. As I told you, I write a weekly article for the newsletter, the Thursday Thought, and I was writing this morning, and I was writing about this concept, roughly like rogue decisions and positive deviance. I haven't come up with a title yet for it, but it was essentially about the term deviant. And when you heard the term deviant, people would think it's negative. But actually, a deviant is somebody who deviates from the path. And all discovery comes from deviation from the path,
That's
from
right.
the normal way of doing things. And again, this is something that you talk about, both that you try to bring to your children, but also to the organization, that you try to instill this idea of go off the beaten path.
Right. Hey, well, first, before I respond to that, one of my favorite articles that you wrote is about how it's around the Greek proverb around casting shadows that we may never sit in,
Oh yeah,
and
thanks, man.
doing things in a way that, to me, I thought that was beautifully written about legacy and paying forward our wisdom, right? So I love
Thank
that
you.
article you wrote.
Thanks, man. Thank you.
You're speaking my love language. That's one of them, going off the beaten path, right? So I believe that it's important to be a good follower. Yet when it comes to innovation, when it comes to discovering something, if you don't go off the trail, it's not going to happen. And so the origin of that, it started with the mountains are like my second chapel. I told you at the beginning, before we got on the show, I just came off my favorite mountain, Mount Rainier, and any opportunity I get, when my kids were young, and to this day, I'll get them out on trails. And a ceremony that we had on our hikes is at a certain point, I would stop and I'd say to my kids, "Hey, where do Herreras go?" And they in unison would yell, "We go off the beaten path." And so we would go off the trail and go explore while also being respectful to nature and whatever path that we were on. But we would go off the path to explore. And I would encourage them to look for things that they wouldn't see had they stayed on the trail. And then I'd take it a step further. I'd have us lay down somewhere and look at the view from a different perspective. And then we'd start pointing out different things that they would have never seen had we not laid down in the dirt to see the different view from the ground. And I just did that all the time. And so I carried that principle over into my community. I'm always encouraging people to, hey, go off the beaten path. That's a core pillar of our culture code. And it stems from the lesson that I wanted to teach my kids on, hey, be respectful. And that's where that deviance comes in. And I couldn't agree more. It's like, hey, don't break the law, but don't be afraid to bend the rules as far as you can. Right. And so that's where my mischief as child number 11 paid off. But I'm trying to teach them a more constructive way of doing it.
It's a brilliant story and brilliant way of getting the lesson across, man. Action again, not just telling them, but actually showing them. And without
Yeah,
doubt, you're creating a pathway, a neural
no
pathway.
doubt. I often tell them too, it's like, hey, my job is to prepare you for the path, not to prepare the path for you. So when my dad used to tell me when I was young, he said, hey, son, when you're 18, I'm going to break your plate and burn your bed. Right. I knew he meant it. I'm telling that to them too. If you ever meet him, you ask him, hey, what's your dad going to do when you turn 18? They're going to say, he's going to break my plate and he's going to burn my bed. Right. I want them to go out on the path. Right.
Yeah.
They'll probably want to get so far away from me, get away from the Mexican TED Talk per se.
Brilliant. Well, man, it's been an absolute pleasure. And last question for you is, where can people find out more about the book, about you, about Populus Group?
Well, I'm very active on LinkedIn, so I can be easily found there. I'm very active on the speaking circuit. Gray Miller, who we talked about earlier, represent me. I'd recommend reaching out to them for speaking, for storytelling, and Populus Group. It's a community I've been blessed to build where we're living out our core belief that everyone deserves an opportunity to succeed, stemming from the bus story in that moment. And that's it.com.
Brilliant. And if you're interested, I'm also with Gray Miller, so you can get a double team of me and Bobby.
There you go.
That'd be cool, wouldn't it?
There you go.
Brilliant, man.
That would be a fun event. That would be a lot of fun.
I'm up for it, man. I'm totally up for it. It's been a pleasure. I'm a huge believer in the gift of struggle. Struggle is where you build muscle. Struggle is where you build strength. And it's a pleasure to have had you on the show. Author of The Gift of Struggle, Life-Changing Lessons About Leading. Bobby Herrera, thank you for joining us.
Hail the underdogs, Aidan. I admire your work. Thank you.
Beautiful. Beautiful, man.